Howdy everyone, you're listening to Blue Jeans and Boots, where genetics grad students talk about how to navigate a PhD program while trying to stay sane. We also invite faculty from our interdisciplinary program here at Texas A&M onto the show to pick their brains about their research, what it's like to be a principal investigator, and their journey to becoming a professor here at A&M. In this episode, we will be talking to Sarah Ingram. Sarah is a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Interdisciplinary Genetics program here at Texas A&M. She received her undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University Texarkana. Currently, she studies under Dr. Shaunna Clark in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavior Sciences. Sarah's research focuses on the relationship between DNA methylation and anxiety. My name is Anthony, and I'll be your host today. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for coming on the podcast. We're happy to have you here.
Very strange being on this side of things.
Right. It was about a year ago that we did the podcast where you interviewed me.
Mm-hmm. Now the tables have turned.
And now the tables have turned. So you've been a part of the podcast for a really long time, since we were first years. Mm-hmm. How's your experience been so far?
Oh, I love the podcast. It's probably my favorite extracurricular. I get to talk to so many different researchers and students from all over the place, and you pick up tiny little things from everybody that you just kind of incorporate into your own routines. You spend so much time asking the professors and other students advice about how they stay sane, and so you can learn some really interesting stuff from that and kind of make your life a little easier along the way. It's been really nice.
That's awesome. So you used to be in the Navy. What made you decide to pursue grad school?
It was actually the Navy that made me decide to pursue graduate school.
Okay.
When I graduated high school, I intended on going for a medical degree, but I really wanted to take a gap year because my senior year of high school, I also had a part-time job and I was taking dual credit classes at the college across the street as well. And so I was just tired and I wanted to take a break. And in the midst of that, I decided that military service was actually the calling that I was going to pursue. And I intended on that being a 20-year career, but life had other plans for me, so that did not work out. And when I was medically retired, I did what a lot of veterans do and kind of floundered a little bit because, most of my 20s had been spent in the military in a very structured existence. And then all of a sudden I had all this freedom that I didn't know what to do with. And so I just kind of bounced around for about a year. And then I found a purpose again in going back to school and saying, well, I really want to still help people. And the job that I did while I was in the military, I was actually, they call it an aviation machinist mate, but it's just a fancy way to say aircraft mechanic. But I worked on helicopters for search and rescue units. And so I was very surrounded by just medical adjacent things. And so I picked up a lot along the way, and I never really lost that interest in medicine. But when I came back to school, I decided medical school wasn't really the way I wanted to approach it. And I will say my undergraduate advisor definitely recommended the program to me. He actually works, or I'm not sure if he still does, but he works in the Department of Biology here at Texas A&M now, and he taught me at the satellite school in Texarkana. But talking to him along the way while I was in undergrad, he recommended this program specifically and said that he thought that I would really like it. So, I guess the motivation was I was always wanting to help people in whatever way that I could. Just after, almost 9 years, medical school just didn't sound all that fun anymore.
Right.
But graduate school sounded really interesting because, it wasn't having to memorize all of this information. It was getting to try and fix a problem, figure out a problem and, put a puzzle together. And that just seemed like a better opportunity to take than just going straight for a medical degree.
Right. And I know a lot of students that are in undergrad have that internal conflict of should I go to grad school or should I go to medical school? And they have a hard time really making that decision. So what really put the nail on the coffin for you to decide, grad school is actually what's for me?
Doing undergraduate research, actually, is what it was. The Texarkana campus is very small. I think at the time I attended, there were 3 buildings on the entire campus, and one of them was the dormitory. So very small place. Didn't have a lot of research activities, but I knew that, medical school or graduate school, regardless of what it was, having undergraduate research experience was really helpful when you wanted to apply for either. And so I took what opportunity was available to me, which was working with Dr. Newman, who did virology work. And he put me on a project of trying to identify plant viruses, potiviruses in coral species from blast sequences on NCBI. And so I did a very big computational project under him, and really it just took a semester of it, and I fell in love with the getting to find things out. You know, there's that nice little spot where you get to find out something before anybody else in the world, and it just feels kind of unique at the moment because you're like, hey, I know this and no one else knows it yet, and now I get to go tell everybody else about it. And that's really what kind of tipped me over. Was I really enjoyed doing the research, and so I decided I would much rather do 5 years of research and, you know, just really focus on that than take as many classes as would be required of me if I went to medical school.
That's fair. Yeah, that is something that you have to consider. Is for us, it's usually only about 2 years in the genetics program of classes, and then the rest of your time here is all research focused.
Mm-hmm. And one of my best friends from the military, I was stationed with her in Guam. She actually went back to school a couple years before I did, and she went into medical school. And so hearing about some of the experience that she was having in medical school, that also helped me decide, I don't think I want to do that to myself. You know, that's great for her, and she's doing wonderful at it, but it just wasn't a right fit for me, I don't think.
Yeah, I think finding something that is the best fit for you, regardless of, you know, whether that be a PhD or an MD, like the outcome, I guess, it's your time that you're spending those 5 to 7 years, I guess, of medical school. But yeah, that's some good insight. Was there anything that you learned in the military that helps you in graduate school?
I think probably adaptability. Things change so much day-to-day basis, especially at search and rescue units, you know, being elbow deep in an engine and then getting a call that, you know, a boat capsized and we need to get a helicopter off the ground. You have to stop what you're doing really quick, secure your area, move over to something else, make sure that's taken care of, and then be able to go back to what you were doing in the first place and, you know, continue making progress on that. And so I think that definitely helps. They instill a lot of determination in you, you know, the cliche, achieve the mission above all costs. And when you look at achieving, you know, a PhD or whatever research it is that you're wanting to conduct, you do have to have a bit of that mentality of, no, I'm going to get this done no matter what. And it doesn't matter, you know, how many obstacles I come across, I need to make this happen. And then I think probably an odd one is an ability to advocate for myself, which I don't mean it as an insult by any means, but I think a lot of people that come into graduate school younger, especially if they just went high school to undergrad to graduate school, they can look at, you know, professors and people in positions of authority and be a little bit intimidated by that because it's, oh, these people are so much smarter than me. They already have this PhD, and, you know, so everything that they say must be law. And that's, yes, at a certain point, that definitely is the case. But, you know, everybody deserves respect, and occasionally some people can forget that. And I think having the ability to advocate for yourself and say, well, you know, this makes me uncomfortable, is actually really helpful. And I think that a lot of younger students can struggle with that, which I feel horrible about because, you know, we're all just people, and you can afford people in positions of authority the respect that they are earned while also, you know, demanding the respect for yourself just as a human being.
Yeah, I think a lot of grad students, like you said, struggle with that balance of, this professor holds my future in their hands, so I want to be respectful and, you know, be worthy of their funding, their time, and all of that. But on the flip side, there's no standard for the PIs to follow in terms of being your mentor. So in some situations, you do have to stand up for yourself and say, hey, you know, that's not okay, or hey, that's not going to work for me. And I think you're right. A lot of younger students do have a hard time doing that. So do you have any advice for how they can recognize when something is maybe a little unfair and that they do need to stand up for themselves?
I mean, I think when I first came in, just like anyone else, I struggled with criticism a little bit, because you do take it as a criticism of yourself. But I learned very early on that it really is just a criticism of your work, and they're trying to, help you improve. And I think approaching it with that way is, you are my mentor, or just, it doesn't even have to be your mentor or professor or anybody else that you might encounter. They're also human. It helps to remember that yes, they've achieved this thing, but you also got accepted into this program, and you wouldn't have been accepted into the program if they didn't have the belief in you that you could achieve those things. And so you have to be able to identify what makes you uncomfortable and be able to communicate that effectively to your mentor. Because if you are just saying, oh, I don't like that, you're making me uncomfortable, that's not very guided criticism, and it's very open-ended for someone to come back and go, well, this is just how I act. And it doesn't matter if that's how someone acts or not. Like I said, we're all human beings, and that's the biggest thing to remember, is that yes, this person deserves their respect for the achievements that they have, but you are also making achievements at the same time. And so you deserve respect for that, in the same sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. It definitely does. I think that a lot of younger students can definitely learn a lot from, and, older ones too, that, it's only up to you to change your situation. If your professor doesn't know what they're saying is rubbing you the wrong way, then they're just going to keep talking like that.
Well, I mean, it's not even that. It's also just in your research. Some PIs may have, at least I've heard stories of PIs having, very specific ideas of what research they want their students to conduct. And then, the student may find some sort of thread that they want to pull on. And so they want to do these new experiments, and they've done a lot of research behind it, and they think that this is really going to help their project. You have to be able to advocate for that in yourself as well, to say, no, I believe in this research, and I would really like to follow this lead. And sure, maybe it might turn out to be nothing, but we're never going to know unless we actually look. And so it's not just even, maybe a PI or a mentor making you uncomfortable or something. It's just also being able to say, no, I believe in this, and I believe in it enough to keep pushing.
Right.
And I've, found out more often than not that if you really believe in something and you do the research to be able to prove why you believe in it, PIs will pretty much let you follow it, even if it is just for a curiosity. Maybe it won't end up in your project, but you still learned something new. You learned a new technique maybe, or maybe you got some more information that adds to the project that you're already doing. And I just think that's really helpful sometimes.
So you were recently awarded the Pat Tillman Foundation Scholarship. Could you tell us a little bit about this award and how it's been helping you to support your studies?
So the Pat Tillman Foundation is probably one of the greatest organizations I've ever heard of. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Pat Tillman was an NFL player for the Arizona Cardinals, and he was a very successful one at that, a household name. Like, I remember growing up with that name in my household. And after the September 11th attacks, he gave up a $3.6 million NFL contract to join the Army, so that he could go deploy, and he felt called to service. So, he gave up quite a lot to go try and help people. Unfortunately, he did die during service, and so this foundation was started by his friends and family to kind of honor his legacy and the qualities that he emulated throughout his life. And so they choose scholars based off 4 pillars of selfless service, lifelong learning scholarship, humble leadership, and potential for impact. And so what they do is they provide not only, potentially a monetary scholarship, but they provide leadership development opportunities for the rest of your life. You get a global network with all of their investors and other company partners. And you also get connected to other veterans, active duty members, and military spouses who are also trying to make a good impact in the world in some way. And that network is so useful because so many people are working on things that are slightly adjacent to yours, and it just gives you this pool of very highly motivated individuals to talk to and bounce ideas off of, and maybe see how you can improve things in the area that you're trying to make an impact in. And they are probably some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. I still don't necessarily understand why I was chosen, because I feel like they're all very high speed individuals and I'm just, here doing my thing, but they do absolutely everything they can to make you feel welcome and to let you know that you would not have been chosen if they didn't believe that you could do good for the world and make something better. And so their entire support system is just to enable you to keep on making that impact, to keep progressing and to get to whatever area you need to be able to fix whatever it is that you're trying to fix, which for me, I guess you could call my platform is I would like to use genetic research to lower veteran suicide rates by trying to identify biomarkers of mental health risk in deploying populations. And so there's other scholars that are working on things that are slightly similar, and I get to talk to them about it, and I get to learn about what they're doing and what technologies they're using, and it's just, I really can't say enough good things about it.
No, that's awesome, and I think that they definitely picked the right person.
Oh, you're too kind.
But that's a good segue into your research. So you studied the relationship between DNA methylation and anxiety. Mm-hmm. So what aspects of DNA methylation seem to be connected to anxiety disorders?
So DNA methylation is an epigenetic modification, and basically what that is it can change how gene expression occurs without changing the underlying DNA sequence. And so they've identified a lot of potential genetic risk factors for anxiety. I will say it's probably the least studied of the psychiatric disorders. I have heard it referred to as the redheaded stepchild of psychiatry before. But so there are a lot of potential genetic risk factors for anxiety. And we also know that some environmental exposures will also predispose people to, anxiety tendencies or anxiety disorders. And DNA methylation as a modification is partly influenced by genetic variation, but it's also known to change in the face of a lot of environmental exposures, many of which are shared with anxiety. And so it is very much a potential regulatory mechanism of anxiety risk factors.
Mm-hmm. So do other epigenetic mechanisms affect other psychiatric disorders? Is it similar to like other epigenetic modifications?
So psychiatric disorders, most of them, if not all of them, share some underlying risk factors. It might be genetics, it might be, maybe childhood trauma, adverse experiences, things like that. But there are commonalities between all of the psychiatric disorders. They've done a lot of studies about a general psychiatric factor that just kind of predisposes you to some sort of mental illness. And there are multiple epigenetic modifications. You have histone modifications like acetylation, and you have contributions from non-coding RNAs. And while they all, slightly behave differently, they all work together. DNA methylation is just the most studied one so far. Mm-hmm. And so I will admit I haven't looked too specifically into how exactly that works, because I'm really trying to focus in on DNA methylation. But yes, they do, all the epigenetic modifications work together. All of the psychiatric illnesses have some sort of like shared factor between them. And so it's all just kind of like a big combination of things.
Mm-hmm. So since you're in your fourth year, you're hopefully trying to wrap up soon.
Yes, potentially next spring if I can keep it up.
That'd be awesome.
Yes.
So can you tell us a bit about what results you found?
So I have just finished up a cell type specific analysis of blood in participants with and without anxiety. And so basically what I have done is conducted an association analysis in whole blood, but we've used an epigenomic deconvolution approach to also look at potential associations in 12 different cell types in blood, which a lot of focus gets put on whole blood, but DNA methylation itself is very cell type specific. So you have to take that into consideration. And we have been able to identify, associations in all of the cell types that we looked at. And there's a range of them. I think it went from 22 in one cell type to over 200 in another one. And I mean, the sample that I've used is a lot bigger than in other studies because this is still very much a kind of beginning thing. I think there's been between 10 and 15 that have been conducted so far. So we're still really on the ground floor of anxiety specifically. They've definitely done way more in other disorders, but we're going through pathway results right now and trying to interpret things, but I don't know if you've ever run one of those. Those can be really confusing. You just get those generic terms and you're trying to figure out exactly where that's fitting in. And so that's about where we're at right now. We've done this in adults, but I'll also be conducting a study in children to see if maybe there are potentially different signatures in childhood and adulthood, because both DNA methylation and anxiety behaves differently across developmental stages. So.
Right. And so long-term, this might be a potential biomarker for an anxiety disorder?
Potentially, yes, very potentially. I would say this is like the very start of it. We're just trying to identify things that people could maybe look at later on. But yeah, I think right now they have, some utility for methylation biomarkers in like cancers and things like that that are really heavily studied. But especially when it comes to psychiatry, I think there's a lot of different confounders that you have to take into account because we're doing statistical analysis of this. And so, we have to control for other things that might influence that relationship, like smoking influences DNA methylation quite a lot. Depression has its own methylation signatures, and it's very comorbid with anxiety, so you have to kind of tease out the depression to look at just the anxiety, and that can be difficult on its own. The hope is that it could potentially be used as a biomarker later on, but we're definitely in the starting stages.
No, that's super exciting though.
I mean, I think it is.
Yeah. So aside from your research, what has been one exciting thing about grad school for you?
I got to do steer wrangling 2 years in a row for the Texas A&M rodeo, and
that's awesome.
I feel like that was a great side quest that I probably wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to do elsewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then what has been a challenging experience?
Everything.
Sure.
Everything is challenging. If I have to pinpoint the most challenging thing, scientific writing. Mm-hmm. I grew up, a fantasy book reader, and so I got used to very just kind of lyrical
flowery
language and trying to condense that down into scientific writing. I have been struggling with it, and I'm making improvements every day, but I would definitely say that's the biggest challenge that I've come across. And each type of scientific writing is different.
Sure.
Too. Like grants are different to your proposal, which is different to your dissertation, and that's different to your manuscripts. It's just very tedious, I think. Mm-hmm. Worth it in the end, though.
How do you think students can get a handle on the different aspects of scientific writing? Like, is there any tips that you've picked up?
Honestly, I think I'm just lucky to have the PI that I have. Mm-hmm. She has noted at some point that I am, very self-aware, that I don't have a problem going back and trying to identify where my problem is. I acknowledge that I have an issue, and I really try and figure out what I can do to confront the issue and make it better. And what has helped me the most is being able to have open conversations with her and say, okay, well, this part of writing you said isn't very good. This is what I was thinking when I was forming this sentence or this paragraph. Can you give me some feedback on maybe where I might have gotten some things wrong or confused or could have shifted my language around to be a little more clear. And so I feel like I'm very lucky that she gives me as much detailed feedback as she does. And that's probably, I'm her only graduate student right now, so I have the ability to get that one-on-one attention, and that I don't necessarily think maybe every student does, especially in maybe the bigger labs where you've got a lot of graduate students. But one of the things that she recently recommended to me, because obviously, we talk about the fact that I'm still improving. This is going to be a process, and, it's going to be the process for the rest of my life probably. But the University Writing Center actually offers some one-on-one help that I hear is really useful when it comes to trying to make your scientific writing better. And so that's something that I'll be utilizing. And I can report back on that later.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think it's good that we have that standardized resource available to us to help us with that stuff. Yeah,
I don't think the libraries here get utilized near enough for all of the extra resources that they give us.
So what advice would you give to incoming graduate students?
Be sure that you love what you do, that this is something that you want to pursue for the rest of your life, because it is going to be a struggle. You're going to struggle with one thing or another the entire time that you're in graduate school, but do you like what you're doing enough to keep struggling, to get to that point where, you're not struggling anymore, and maybe you start to become an expert in your field. Just make sure it is something that you love. I can't say I 100% agree with that saying that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. It's still work.
Right.
But I enjoy my work, right. And I think that is necessary.
Yeah. So the question that we like to ask all of our guests, what do you do to stay sane?
I crochet a lot. I like to keep my hands busy. So I crochet things for people. I crocheted a blanket for my niece. I'm making a jacket for a friend of mine right now. Things like that. I go camping a lot. And also, I am a Renaissance Fair nerd, so I dress up like a pirate, and I go walk around the Renaissance Fair on some weekends. And it's so vastly different from the structure of graduate school that it's like just a nice little step away. Pretend to be a different person for a couple of days and then come back refreshed, and you don't have to, I feel like we wade so deep into our research sometimes that, taking a couple days to be completely removed from it is a really good way to stay sane.
Yeah, that's awesome. So my last question is, after you are awarded your PhD, what are your next steps?
I would like to get into veteran research specifically. The very end goal is to get into policy-oriented research so that we can really start to try and find these identifiers of mental health risk in deployed populations, because I love the military, I do. We've made great strides with it, since I was still active duty, but there is still a bit of a stigma around seeking help for mental health issues. And I think in the long run, that creates just so much more of a problem. Whereas if we could, right now, a lot of screening when you get back is just a questionnaire. And that's very easy to lie on. And, when you're surrounded by a mentality that if you seek help for your mental illness, you're, weak, or you're damaging the mission or something like that, it makes it a struggle to take care of yourself. But if we can get to a point where we can find some sort of mark in the blood that is, no, you need to go get seen, let's get you into some sort of intervention potentially, or maybe let's just keep an eye on you and see how you're doing in the upcoming months. I think we could lower not only the utilization of the VA, but also the suicide rates. And, that is the end goal, is to get to a point where we can translate military research to the policymakers to enact this change and make it a little easier, I guess more achievable, to take care of the veterans. I know that could, being a veteran myself, that could sound kind of like a selfish motivation, But at the end of the day, I have my support system, and I attend my treatments and, adhere to that. And I've done everything that I need to do. I just want to make sure that the work that I put out benefits the next generations that come through, so that maybe they can avoid some of the struggles I went through myself.
No, I think that's a noble cause, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today and tell us your story. So today's episode was hosted by me, Anthony Matarazzo, and produced by Veronica Mojic. This podcast is brought to you by the Texas A&M University Interdisciplinary Graduate Program in Genetics and Genomics. If you have any questions about our program here at A&M, please feel free to email us at bluejeansandboots@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube at Genetics Podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.